Hello and welcome back to today's hardware review, and that's right, today we're looking at the brand new network solution from QNAP. They are a company that have gone in the last few years from a company that was largely all about NAS into producing more and more network solutions in your overall environment. But before we go a second further, let's get the elephant in the room out the way. First and foremost, this is a router. I'm going to call it a router 10 times throughout this video, at least 20, maybe even 30 more after that. I'm not going to say router, and I know a lot of you are going to go in the comments and bang out and tell me exactly why I'm wrong. In short, I believe Route 66, that's where I get my kicks. This is a router, so that's the way I'm going to go. So unfortunately, if you want to get that out of the way in the comments early doors, get in there. I'll give you a second. Good, I'm glad we knocked that out. So, this is the hardware review of the QNAP QHora-301W router. It supports Wi-Fi 6 and 10G, along with a bunch of service and support options for businesses that are looking for improvements over their network environment. Maybe they're a multi-site that uses MPLS and they want to move over already for intelligent network management to things like an SD-WAN. This has got a completely subscription-free QU-WAN service built into it. So a lot of enterprise users are looking at this as a viable option to upgrade that network interface on a multi-site environment. But it's not just that. I know a number of home users, myself included, are looking at this as a viable upgrade to the existing routers they have. Whether you've got a router indoors through an internet service provider, ISP, or you are someone that has already upgraded and gone for maybe the Asus Store Wi-Fi 6 that I talked about before, the AX92U, that's the one I already have at home. Or you could be looking at some of the other routers that we've seen from the likes of Netgear or even from Synology in recent years, when they've been releasing their own range of routers, be they mesh, be they Wi-Fi 6, any of them. So this is already going into a little bit of a crowded marketplace as it is, but it does bring a lot of very unique things to it. And spoiler alert for the end of the video, for the most part, I am impressed by this device. This video is mainly going to be a hardware review. I've got a full software review coming shortly afterwards, along with some setup guides and stuff like that, and some bumps along the way that we may have encountered. But overall, this gets so close to the mark that I am super impressed by it. And right now, this is the router to beat for me. Why is that? Why should you consider spending £350 on this device today? Well, let's look at that figure. £350 is a lot of money for a router. Let's face it, when you get in any internet service, they chuck in a router for you, and generally it's always going to be a wireless router. It's not going to be some brainless, cableless modem. And on top of that, you get that for free. So why would you spend 350? And this video is to help you understand that 350 quid for this isn't actually a vast sum to a business user. To a prosumer or a home user, it might seem a bit steep. But you've got to look at this as a complete package. It's not perfect. There are a couple of things where I think there are room for improvement, and I'm sure you'll disagree with me in the comments, but let's knock on and get on with this. So this is the QHora. Let's get the first thing I don't like out the way. That name. What an awful name. I'm sorry to go, so early doors on that name, but I don't get it. I'm sure it means something, and I know this might be a regional conflict, I'm not sure, but for me that name's not doing it for me right now. The external packaging, it's, fairly normal standard box. This is probably one of the few items from the QNAP library of devices you're almost certainly going to find on a retail shelf. The majority of QNAP solutions that I've talked about previously, they're largely limited to eShops, aren't they? But this device here gives you a bit of information about the device on the inside here. There's lots of information with regards to the hardware and software capabilities that we're going to talk about throughout. And on the other side, we can talk about a little bit on there about their highlights, their simple setup, parental controls, WAN configurations, QVPN, that sort of stuff, and all the kind of facilities and software that QNAP have been working on for a number of years now. Because it's worth highlighting that QNAP have been sort of stepping into the likes of improved network interfaces, be they cable or Wi-Fi 6 upgrade cards. They've been going to routers and switches. I know there's some information behind me. They have really expanded into their hardware in terms of populating a network environment for most home and business users. And this is the first entry, which I'm sure is going to be an evolving range of router solutions from them. We already talked vaguely a few months ago about the QMiro, their range of mesh routers that they're working on there that we're hopefully going to see in the next few months. but this solution is very much the big boy straight away. So let's go inside and see what we get for our money, because again, 350 sobs is a lot of money. If we look inside, nothing more in that box, leave that there. We can take a look at what we get. So we've got a PSU. This is an external power brick, a little bigger than I would have expected. This is a 24 watt PSU. So again, in terms of a router, 24 watt is actually a pinch higher than I would have expected from a router in this day and age. But that said, this does have a lot of hardware capabilities that you're just not going to find in most other router solutions. Because the ones that we've seen, the ones we've talked about on the channel that were Wi-Fi 6, or they were the mesh ones like the Synology one I showed you, generally they either have very modest internal hardware or very modest external hardware. This is a solution that really supersizes most elements of its architecture, and it's really going in big early doors. So I'm not surprised at a slightly chunkier PSU at 24 watts there. We've also got an external UK mains power cable, and again, what I would have expected, and I know there's certain regions in the world where buying one of these plugs on the high street is apparently quite tough. Did not know that. So again, if you are looking to make sure you get the right solution straight off the bat, do visit the guys at span.com. They will make sure you get the right kit that's completely tailored to you straight out of the box. We've got the unit itself that we'll look at in just a moment. And yes, I already unpacked that. I wanted to make sure it was all inside before I started this video. We have a quick start installation guide here that gives us a lot of information about setting the device up for the first time, details on the LEDs, how to find it on the local area network for the first time, and more. And of course, there's lots of online guides that are regularly updated, along with firmware updates on this device regularly to keep on top of any security patches long term. We've also got a cat cable here. We can have a look there. Now, this for me was going to be the first hurdle for this. We want to know, is this going to be a Cat 5e or a Cat 6? Because for me, this will tell us a lot. And we can have a look here. I know this is super dull for you guys, and it is a Cat 6 cable. That's pleasing to say. Don't just trust the fact that it's blue. Why did I care so much about it being Cat 6? Well, if you are looking at any 10G solution, on smaller distances, it's less of a problem in terms of latency, but anything that's 10G, I generally expect these days to only get Cat 6 and above. If you get a Cat 5e cable on a 10 gigabit Ethernet solution, NAS, switch, router, then that Cat 5e will be a limit long term, particularly when you go over larger distances, taking advantage of 10 gigabit Ethernet. So always use Cat 6, and I will always give bonus points to any brand that makes a point of including the right Cat cable. The price difference is minimal, but a lot of companies still seem to make that mistake. So let's have a look at the unit itself. Here we go. That is the QHora. Let's get that nice and close up to camera there without the light reflecting off the white chassis. I'd say now this is my second gripe with this device, because for the most part I genuinely like this device. And it's the colour white on the chassis. It is a brushed matte effect, and I do particularly like it. I don't know how well that's going to come across on camera. They've gone for a nice artistic design there on that front panel. It's not just matte. There's a really nice brushed effect there on the front. But it's still a white plastic chassis, and it's, although I didn't expect it to be wholly metal, because normally you only see metal in a device like this if it happens to be maybe a 10G switch with lots of activity and heat dissipation. But this is a silent fanless device, ergo that plastic chassis might get a bit warm. And also the idea that it's white. A lot of people, this is very bright. You might wall mount this device because it has got screws in the back there for wall mounting. And if you are going to wall mount a device like this, white might be innocuous against white walls there, but I think a lot of people are not going to be overwhelmed by that colour scheme there. QNAP, a lot of their more budget solutions in their range tend towards plastic white chassis, be they the more affordable switches that we talked about before in the 308 and 408 series, as well as a number of the 31 series chassis like that. They all seem to be white plastic. So for such an enterprise grade device, and I do believe it is, I'm very surprised they went with that colour scheme and that material. Now, I mentioned about this chassis being fanless in design. That is true. It utilises a number of internal heat sinks. If we bring that up to there, we've got a lot of ventilation there on one side and a whole host of ventilation there on the other, and tons of ventilation on the base. rubberized feet as well, so it's ever so slightly raised from table level. And again, that raising of the chassis straight up to allow heat dissipation will assist things. But normally a chassis like this, I would have expected a metal top there to assist heat dissipation. There's no moving parts inside this, so you haven't got to worry about that kind of heat being generated. But what I will say is, with the 10 GBE active on this that we'll talk about in a bit, I would expect a bit of heat generated there, and particularly given that they've understood that larger PSU inside there, I would have thought, again, a metal chassis. Very small complaints, I've got to say, but still worth noting. So, what can we talk about on this device? Let's go for the very front there, and we can see that bank of LEDs there on the base of the device. We can see there on the top, we've got the embossed QNAP logo, but as all that front panel shows us, we've got a lot of LEDs to play with there. So we've got power, we've got system status, we've got individual LEDs that can be, that denote each of the individual 1 GBE ports that we can talk about in a bit. There's also designated LEDs for the 10 GBE ports, 2 of them, so again, lovely bit of hardware there, and support of that Wi-Fi connection to let you know when it's active and when it's being accessed. This supports not just Wi-Fi 6, of course, the latest convention in wireless networking. It also supports Wi-Fi 5, so that's ACN, that sort of thing. So 802.11ax being the newest form of Wi-Fi, or the most current at least anyway, with Wi-Fi 6E around the corner, it does give you a good bank of coverage in terms of speed and performance. So if we look at the rear here, depending on rear or front, depending on how you're connecting with it, we can have a look at those ports and connections. So we've got those 4 1 gigabit Ethernet ports there. So again, you can connect multiple LAN devices as well as have the Wi-Fi 6, which again has purported via a single device connection, can give one device up to 1,200 megabits per second. So that's 120 meg. So that's a good 40 or so megabytes higher than traditional Wi-Fi 5. Now, it has to be said that this is a multi-antenna, multi-frequency device, and with it supports up to 3,600 megabits per second bandwidth coverage there. So again, 360 megabytes wireless connectivity across multiple devices and frequencies. So again, plenty of speed inclusive there. But I would say that we will be doing a full software overview of this, but by the looks of things like something like link aggregation may not be supported on this device. We'll go into more detail during the software overview, but you have to think of this device as a router more so than a switch. It has certain crossover with a switch, but one of the main reasons one would assume it doesn't have that kind of connectivity, and we'll go into more detail in the software review, is these 2 lovely 10G base T ports here. That's 2 copper 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. So that means these ports, which by the way can be utilized for both LAN and WAN, so that's local area network connectivity, and also outside too, which means you can pump larger internet connections, pump larger external data connections into it. And again, that's where QWAN really leans into the connectivity there, and that mesh VPN stuff when devices are exchanging data within that subnetwork. Those 2 10 GBE ports there are going to be hugely beneficial, and this allows you to connect the likes of a 10G NAS and therefore pump it out into other 1 GBE connections here. There's also the added benefit, of course, that you can connect multiple 10G systems into this, and then those be accessible by the wider network. Think that 10G connection being shared by both the LAN and the Wi-Fi 6 connected devices will be enormously beneficial. Next to those, we have got some USB 3 ports as well, and those USB 3 ports can be used for low-level file access. And again, we are going to test some USB devices, but right now the compatibility list on QNAP's website is a little bit limited for such a new product. This hasn't fully commercially released right now at the time of this recording. I think it's any day now it's going to be reaching full commercial release. And of course, on the side here we have got a WPS button, which a little bit old school, but still very, very useful if you're using devices that don't have kind of a KVM, keyboard, video, mouse input, or even any kind of graphical user interface where you can interact with it and enter a passkey. That's where WPS lives, so you can one-click either end, and it can synchronize and connect those 2 devices without need of a login code. So overall, it is a very sturdy and very kind of well-equipped hardware device. And again, I say that word plastic chassis, it does feel very, very solid as a device. I mean, again, there's a whole lot going on inside as well, if I haven't just crushed the hell out of it. Inside, it features a 64-bit processor. That's a Qualcomm, and I'm going to get this right reading off my notes, and that is an IPQ8072A Hawkeye 2 processor. It's a quad-core 2.2 gigahertz CPU, and that CPU is pretty much what keeps things moving, be it for the dedicated QWAN stuff or their own QU router operating system that lives on this, with all of the port management, quality of service, priority of service, as well as creating virtual LANs as well, all within that software. Now, alongside that, there is 1 gig of memory as well as 4 gig of EMC memory, which is where pretty much where the OS is going to live. But that 1 gig of memory is a lot more than a lot of companies offer. When you look at a lot of more modern router solutions, and again, whether that's Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6, generally you find 256 to 512 megabytes of memory. The result is that although, you know, the normal data packets and transmission are fine, the minute you're really fleshing out and using every single connection, it kind of creates its own internal bottleneck as the software runs, and every port and connection feels that. So 1 gig of memory on this is actually quite a lot. I know it doesn't sound much, 1 gig in the modern sense of things, but it is a lot of memory, and this system will definitely take advantage of that with a number of those QWAN and QWAN orchestrator applications that we're going to talk about later on. Now, on top of that, with that 24-watt PSU powering all of those ports and connections and that great little CPU and that memory inside, it opens the door to a number of software and hardware advantages inside. First and foremost, if we're going to talk about Wi-Fi 6, we've got to talk about the fact that inside that little box, and hopefully there's a graphic on screen, there is 8 antennas inside. 8 antennas inside this tiny little box. Now, that leads to another area of slight contention for me, because when I looked at a number of more modern Wi-Fi 6 solutions, almost all of them have external antenna. I was chatting to a colleague before this review, and we were talking about the nature of internal and external antenna, and the idea that an external antenna is still technically internal. It's metal encased in plastic, but the placement of these antenna and the lowness of these antenna, he would have to concede that it's still going to be, if it's table mounted, quite a low angle of access. And if you've got furniture, you've got desks and chairs and printers and stuff in an office, or even in a home, that low level of access may be problematic. And although it won't, you know, totally hamper things, it will ebb things down ever so slightly with internal antennas of this nature. That said, it can be wall mounted as long as it's based up a little higher. I think you won't have any problems of coverage of that nature. Now, those antennas support 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bandwidths there, and the frequencies are quite good, and they run in 2 times 2 and 4 times 4 with that dual band nature. And again, spread across those is where you get that 3600 megabyte coverage with 120 megabytes per second possible via the 2.4 gigahertz frequencies, and 250 thereabouts megabytes per second possible over the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, and that's where you get that AX 3600 coverage there in 3600 megabits per second or 360 megabytes. Along with those multiple antennas inside there, you can actually create multiple SSIDs, that's multiple wireless networks. So it's not just a case of like your ISP router goes, have your main internet connection, and also you can create a guest network and internet connection as well. This supports guests, but it also supports up to 6 individual SSIDs from this device, which is going to be hugely beneficial to those that have separate networks or those that are taking advantage of virtual LANs via that software. And what they want to do is create these sub-networks around the device so you can make sure the right assets are accessible to the right people in the background. Now, how you interact with it and the speed you get with it is going to be a little bit dictated by yourself. If you've got a Wi-Fi 6 device, check what your coverage and your frequency coverage is. If particularly with regards to MU-MIMO, with that multi-band, multi-user coverage, because the number of antennae that you utilize and the frequency coverage of your client device will dictate that performance. You might not get the 1200, or you might get even higher than that on a single data transaction. So QNAP have had to play a little bit safe on that one with the speeds that they've promoted across those different frequencies and bands. But again, it will be dictated by the client devices, much like when we talk about 1G and 10G, the speed and performance that you're hoping to get and the bandwidth overall, I should add. Now, let's talk about QWAN and why it serves as a decent alternative to the number of SD-WAN out there. Because for QNAP, if not for everyone else, really, it is a big, big selling point for this device towards business. I know a number of home, prosumer, and kind of SMB users are looking at this as a traditional business router, and obviously 10G and Wi-Fi 6 in the same box with a great little software GUI is appealing. But if you're a business with a multi-site arrangement dotted around, and you've got things to bear in mind such as VoIP, which is becoming increasingly problematic, I might add, in most businesses, where it needs to have its place in the network. If not reserved, then a quick switch in the back end to make sure VoIP lines have priority when they come through. On top of that, you've got things like scheduled backups and then non-scheduled data packet transmission. And up until now, SD-WAN has served as a viable alternative to MPLS, something we talked about at the top of the video, in its more intelligent handling of data with the network transmission between multiple SD-WAN supported boxes, changing and adapting data packet priority and service priority on the fly in milliseconds, if not seconds. QU-WAN, the only difference between it and those other myriad of other SD-WAN service providers is theirs is subscription free. When you buy this device, you get access to QU-WAN and QU-WAN orchestrator services with this device. An orchestrator is this massive overview system that allows you to step one step higher than the QU-WAN network setup on these multiple sites. So, say for example, you have multiple office locations where you have one main hub office space, and then you have a few different sites that manage and handle different sales operations, different marketing operations, etc., etc. You need to know that the communication between that central hub, maybe as it working as a backup or it is a backup of another backup, are lovely and pure and synchronized and constant. But sometimes the network and internet connectivity between those two places is going to become busy. The bandwidth is going to be consumed by services either beyond your control or that are too randomized to predict. And that's where SD-WAN lives. It's able to change on the fly. And that's why it's so beneficial for business guys that are looking at this solution as an alternative to subscription-based SD-WAN. Think of it, one of the main reasons we talk about NAS here, as an alternative to cloud-based storage, where it's the subscription service over time versus the solid payment now and long-term holding on to something, a long-term physical product. The same comparison is very apt here. Now, do I like this device? Yes. Do I think it's perfect? As mentioned at the top of the video, no. I think there's a few tiny improvements that could be made. And little improvements that I'm sure, as this area of networking equipment from QNAP reaches maturity, will iron out over the years. But what I will say is right now, I've done some Googling before this video. There's nothing like this in the world. There's similar, there's frightfully expensive similar, but there is certainly no £350 intelligent router like this on the market right now that also gives you Wi-Fi 6 and 10G around about 300 odd nicker. And that's what I meant at the top of the video. This is a solution that arrives with a price tag that can scare some and surprise others, because some of us are looking at this going, my God, that's expensive. And there's a lot of other people going, that is way too cheap to be that good. And it's up to you what you think this is to you. So I'm going to be doing software overviews, and we're going to find out more about how this handles data. And of course, we're going to be doing some extensive Wi-Fi 6 testing over multiple devices, be it with my upgraded laptop that we saw in a previous video, or upgrading some PCs to Wi-Fi 6. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and you enjoyed my use of the word router, not router. If you didn't, sorry you didn't make it. If you did enjoy it, God bless you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Click subscribe if you did, and visit the links in the description to both NASCompares and span.com to learn more. Otherwise, I will see you next time.